All right, Sonic Truth Dynasty Focused Podcast on the Player Profiler Network. I'm Alan Zaslowski of rotowire.com, along with Theo Grebinger, the OG, and special guest today. We have, you know what? Everyone says special guest, so we're not just going to call you a regular guest, John Daigle. I asked Theo to go out and get someone that goes to the same barbershop as I do, and he came through. And we appreciate you coming in to talk a little dynasty-focused stuff. We try to not use the R word on here, redraft, too much, but this time of year it's hard to avoid it. So, John Daigle, now you're most famous for couch surfing. Is that still true of you? I mean, when we used to hear you on the couch with Sigmund Bloom, you'd be writing a fantasy article from some Airbnb. What's the living situation right now?
Someone went to my hypothetical wiki and has done their research. Good job. Yes, I used to be a couch surfer because over the pandemic, since we couldn't travel, and I am someone with wanderlust admittedly, I decided to then take to the country instead. So I just lived from my car, hotels, or Airbnbs just to record shows because I was still working with NBC. And as we know, football was the only thing during the pandemic that did not stop. It actually just got even more emphasized since it was the only sport going with UFC. But drove from coast to coast 4 different times, and thus living from my car, got to meet and stay on couches of so many different, what I consider friends now in the fantasy industry. So don't do that as often. I'm now settled in Chicago. I found a nice little comfy home here, but I am still a traveler. Yes.
Theo, you could never live that lifestyle.
No, I'm more of a one place kind of guy, but it was awesome. We actually, John, when I first connected with John came on the GOAT District, and he was one of the first kind of big guests that I was able to book, when we were really building it up. And I think John, I don't even remember whose apartment you were at, John, but it's certainly you were somewhere in the country when you first recorded with us. And that was awesome. And yeah, this was Dynasty Week is coming to a close. This is officially day 8. So it's kind of this is the soft ending, but I really, really wanted to have John on for it. John is what I consider one of the giant voices now in fantasy. I listen to all of his stuff still. I know he's very respected among analysts, and I think you have a little bit of a reputation now for what you do in redraft and some of the stuff you do in best ball. But you're also in a dynasty league with me. We're in the Black Crown League. Curtis Patrick added me this year. I was really, really excited about that. But John has a great mind for pretty much everything fantasy football related, and I'm happy to get a chance to just chop it up dynasty-wise.
John, we talk about Dynasty all the time on Sonic Truth Podcast, and we've been talking about it since February, but what we forget is the FFPC reported that the most Dynasty startups got filled this week. So just talk about a single quarterback league, dynasty league, where it's 3 receivers, with flex, all that kind of stuff. What do you think is the best way that newer dynasty players or even experienced ones should build a dynasty roster when they're in startup drafts?
I always just support fewer bench spots and more starting spots. So even with single quarterback, 3 wide receivers, it's totally fine. I think giving people options for super flex and tight end premiums, it's still the way to go, especially because whenever you're doing startups from the back of the first round, if the rest of the league goes heavy at quarterback, tight end premium at least gives you a pivot, a way to answer and just try to instead be unique with doubling tight end up. And so that's why I prefer those options. But for simple 1 quarterback, 3 wide receiver starts, I think it's pretty basic. Those are also the most common rankings and mock drafts you can find online. So honestly, nothing unique to add, really. We're all chasing the big 3 quarterbacks, of course, even though I do think Fields and Justin Herbert are at least gravitating towards those top 3 spots, maybe even as early as this year, honestly, in points per game. And so, yeah, honestly, that's the way I prefer to play, but nothing too crazy with a 1 QB league.
Theo shared some fan mail with me this week also when I suggested that in a single quarterback dynasty league that it might be okay to take a Patrick Mahomes at pick 10 in a single quarterback league just because you're going to have these guys forever and when I say fan mail, it was hate mail. Is that even pliable, or is that just total donkey stuff?
I don't think it's donkey, but it's not my cup of tea. It gets lost the point of having fun in all of this, because all of us do so much intense research and construction analysis and whatever. And so, like, if someone wants Patrick Mahomes for the next 15 years of his career, by all means. Like, do I think it's correct? No. But if it's fun in the end, go for it. I don't care anymore. That's why I actually just get excited about home leagues coming around in August, because home leagues are the Wild West. They make the dense offseason of FFPC drafts, underdog drafts, everything we do, they make it so much more fun because everyone forgets about ADPs and just doesn't care anymore when it comes to home leagues. They're all using ranking sheets, but after the second or third shot, those ranking sheets go out the windows in the 5th round. So yeah, just have fun, honestly.
Theo, we've been grinding our dynasty rankings, our redraft best ball rankings, but question for you here is that with all of the offseason news, chatters, rumors, doesn't matter if it's fake or real news, is there any specific piece of news that moved your dynasty rankings over at Player Profiler the most this year? Dating back to, say, like February through now. What's a piece of news and the player that's moved up or down?
Well, certainly the biggest piece of news rankings-wise for us was Ken Walker. We were ahead of him. Like, Alan, when I came on your pod way before the NFL draft on RotoWire, you were way ahead on Ken Walker. I got a lot of flack. I kind of compared him to like a Nick Chubb. I said it was a guy we want to kind of sell. Billy Muzio and I had JJ Zachariason on First Class Fantasy, and John's actually been on that. He was great. But JJ kind of brought him up as a dynasty sell early, and I think there was like a lot of pushback. But to me, it was easy. When Seattle drafted Zach Charbonnet, I think it made Ken Walker the biggest dynasty loser of this entire offseason. It doesn't matter what we think of him. He has increased competition, and he has a player that can take his job on the roster. He didn't have that before the NFL draft. I think he was kind of a top 5-ish running back in dynasty before the NFL draft, and now it's hard to really consider him to be in like that elite, top 6-ish. I think he's still the kind of guy you want on your roster, but there's certainly a lot of risk. So for me, that was kind of the biggest faller and the most significant piece of news.
Yeah, John, what do you think that was the headlines of all the headlines that have happened that it persuaded you, for better or for worse, when you're talking about long-term value of players?
There was quite a few of them, but I think Joe Mixon has probably gone through the ringer this offseason. It probably was a time to sell in the beginning of the year, given that it was the final year of his contract anyhow. But honestly, just given their depth chart right now, the Bengals, and the fact that really all they did for competition was bring back Treylon Williams on a $1 million deal, and then also draft Chase Brown in the 3rd round, or in a day 3 pick, and Chase Brown, as we know, didn't play special teams in his last 2 years in college. So if Joe Mixon is still on this roster come week 1, and Treylon Williams and Chris Evans, who both played special teams in the playoffs, are active for this team, I don't know how Chase Brown is even like a game day active in the regular season. So I've gone all the way down and back all the way up now with Mixon, honestly.
Yeah, Zeke Elliott's going to look good in the Bengals uniform, guys. But we're going to talk about Joe Mixon. I like how Joe Mixon's ADP is in the FFPC, and we're going to come back and talk about him and a bunch of players. But first, quick word from our sponsors over at the FFPC.
Hey, people always ask me, what's the World Series of Fantasy? What's the Super Bowl of Fantasy? And it's easy. It's the FFPC. Their signature Players Championship has a $6 million prize pool, and their best ball leagues start in February. And they're the answer to so many questions. Hey, what's the best place to get a Dynasty Orphan? Well, you can adopt a Dynasty Orphan at the FFPC right now. There's more orphans at the FFPC than anywhere else on the internet. That's why we partner with them. So if you want to play fantasy football for low, medium, high stakes, you love Dynasty, you love best ball, you love seasonal leagues, all types of fantasy footballers need to go to the FFPC. And remember, use promo code Underworld. Promo code Underworld gets you $25 off your first team. Promo code Underworld, $25 off your first team, no matter what the format is, at the FFPC. Go get it.
All right, a little reset here. I'm Alan Zaslowski of RotoWire.com for the Sonic Truth Podcast, along with Theo Greminger of Player Profiler, and of course, John Daigle, who does a lot of great work over at 4 for 4. Right before we left, I was about to allude to that we were going to talk about our flag plant players that we just can't stop drafting or trading for, players that we're going to take a stand on, that we're going to tout, and then, we're going to do some Twitter victory laps when they score a touchdown, and then if they do poorly, guys, we're going to delete the tweet, right? We're not going to take credit for any bad doing. doing.
how it works.
Yeah, I love the Joe Mixon call here because let's say they can't restructure him, John, and they do leave him. He does cut him. Don't they have to bring somebody in?
They do, and maybe that points to Dalvin Cook. But right now, these veteran free agents have been on the streets for so long. I don't worry about any of them. Like, at what point do we have confidence in your Leonard Fournette's, Kareem Hunts, when even other teams don't even care? They'd rather add the Zach Evans of the world, sign Sean Tucker to large undrafted contracts. So I just don't know how much it even matters. And remember, Burrow, or for Mixon right now, it's not about the contract negotiations. That's what and how we knew Dalvin Cook was going to get cut, because they lowballed him. He said, I don't want that. Thus, they came to a draw and they had to cut him. For Mixon, it's not even about the contract. Right now, it's really just about the looming suspension and off-field problems. But we've still become so far removed from that as the months go along that I do think his spot on this roster is completely safe now.
Yeah, we talk. Theo, I was going to say, when we talk about these veteran running backs, I don't want to just hear about the Mixon situation because that's such an important one. But in all these drafts, these FFPCs, I get Leonard Fournette, I take Zeke Elliott, I take Kareem Hunt, sometimes all three of them. Where are those three guys going to land?
I personally think that based on where the market is right now, it's going to be somebody getting injured over the summer. Because like John said, if somebody wanted to lock these guys down, they've been sitting there. Somebody could, and the whole idea of giving them rest and not like having them show up to, mini camps and stuff like that, you can still say, hey, you can sit this one out, just show up and sit on the sidelines. You can have veteran deference in that sense. But like the whole argument is this player is going to get, affected because Zeke Elliott's going to sign there or Leonard Fournette's going to sign there. I mean, they're out there and they haven't been signed yet. So I personally think it's going to be, every summer we see somebody get hurt. We don't want it to happen, but it happens. The J.K. Dobbins, the Cam Akers, these guys get hurt in the summertime. And I think you're going to see one of these teams say, you know what, I'm going to go get Leonard Fournette. I'm going to go get Zeke Elliott. I'm going to give those guys 15 touches a game and they'll be just fine. So I think we don't know with those kind of guys. I think Dalvin Cook is the difference because Dalvin Cook was playing at such an extremely high level last year. And I think that kind of gets pushed to the side. I think Dalvin Cook also is going to command more money. I personally think Dalvin Cook signs in July and somebody gives him a decent contract. The other guys, I think it's pretty low level amount of money, and I think it's a potentially just a fill in. There's some Kareem Hunt rumors out there. I know that Washington has been linked to him recently, and a couple teams like that. But I don't know, Alan. I think it's kind of a wait and see with these older guys.
To your point, Alan, we should definitely still be drafting Cook as a spot starter no matter where he lands. But I do agree with you. I think Zeke signs before Fournette, but Fournette is the one I'm still targeting whenever I draft those guys in the later rounds, if only because I'm indifferent on Rachaad White personally, but for whatever we think about Rachaad White, he finished 13 games with Leonard Fournette last year, and that coaching staff still trusted Fournette to out-touch White in 10 of those 13 games. So, he's already proven he can be out there earning targets, and so that's why I prefer just to target him over Zeke.
How about the Cleveland Browns? I mean, Jerome Ford, people are drafting him late in dynasty drafts and in best ball drafts, John. And there's something weird about it, right? It just doesn't feel like this is going to be their guy. It seems like one of the veterans could easily go to Cleveland. Which one's the most likely?
Well, not Kareem Hunt. We know that. Not that already.
Scratch him up.
I guess if it had to be one, the type of back they need is a Kareem Hunt-like receiving back. So it would probably be Fournette. But again, we're so far into this process. I think they just roll with Nick Chubb, honestly, and Jerome Ford. And I think Jerome Ford's ADP has somewhat skyrocketed. I'm not sure he has standalone value, to be honest. Whereas I just think the answer still, it all goes back to Nick Chubb, who already finished as the RB6 in points per game in half PPR leagues just last year. FFPC, obviously, full PPR. But also, remember, when Deshaun Watson went under center, that team averaged the 10th highest rate of 3 wide receiver sets, whereas Jacoby Brissett, they were middle of the road, 16th overall. And from 3 wide receiver sets last year, Nick Chubb averaged 7 yards per carry, and for his career, he's averaged 5.6 yards per carry from 11 personnel. So without Kareem Hunt now, after already finishing as the RB6, you have to question, what is Chubb's ceiling now? And so I think, honestly, just all roads lead back to Chubb.
So what are they going to do? Oh, sorry, Theo, go ahead.
And Felton's still on that roster. Talking about a guy with a little bit of pass catching ability, Allen, who has had injuries here and there, but I think Felton's a guy to watch this summer. Memphis Young of the Dynasty Warzone, also on Player Profiler. He's a big Felton guy. So I think that's like, yeah, Jerome Ford, he's certainly the most like-for-like replacement for Nick Chubb if there was an injury in season. I think that, a veteran coming in would be Nick Chubb takes a knock at the beginning of August and Cleveland doesn't feel confident in their running back depth and they want to add a veteran. So if everybody stays healthy to the end of the summer, I think it is Jerome Ford, for better or for worse, with a little bit of Felton mixed in.
Theo, something else that was very interesting in the real NFL draft this year was all of the teams that drafted quarterbacks in the 4th round, hoping to hit the next Brock Purdy. But it's probably more likely that they're going to find the next Davis Mills, right? So Clayton Tune got some good buzz this week. He's got a chance to start week 1. We already know Kyler Murray is unlikely to play, before week 8. I would say he's probably not going to play at all this year. But you got Colt McCoy, you have Clayton Tune. Is this a player in some of those superflex formats that we should be targeting a little bit more aggressively? What's really the upside for Clayton Tune, not knowing much about his college profile?
Davis Mills. I think he would be like a low-level starter in an offense that will struggle. I think that stylistically, Connor and Hollywood Brown and Rondell Moore, they have a couple pieces that we like. Maybe people are betting on Trey McBride right now. We certainly like it as a fantasy manager for them to go with Clayton Tune instead of some like horrible situation like a Jeff Driscoll where they're not really running an NFL offense.
David Blau.
I think he might be a little bit better than David Blau. I think we could say, we can take an optimistic approach with Tune. John, are you on any of these Cardinals now? I kind of think they're so beat up that like James Conner is kind of we talked about James Conner as like, if you're a win now dynasty team, you can go get James Conner and Keontae Ingram for so cheap and just roll out with Conner until he falls off and potentially have a handcuff that is dirt cheap. Or are you trying to avoid Arizona Cardinals right now?
For Connor and Marquise Brown, those are really the two I prioritize if I'm trying to win now. I do think Rondell Moore is still quite sneaky, if only because, it's tough to pin him there, especially since they spent a day 2 pick on Michael Wilson, who, as we know, like all those scouts, they go to the Senior Bowl and they give up. They stop scouting after that. They're like, oh, whoever looks good here, we're done. And Michael Wilson, of course, looked good at the Senior Bowl. But at the same time, like Rondell Moore, I still haven't projected to start in 2 wide sets right now. I guess it wouldn't be shocking if Wilson came out on top. But for Connor, I don't know how much it carries over, given that it's an entirely new regime, an entirely different coaching staff. But remember, he did outtouch the rest of Arizona's backfield in his last 7 games, 149-15. They basically just didn't give anyone else any amount of touches, and that's how Connor was a top 15 running back. And remember, that Arizona offense over that time was still 27th in points per game, like just wasn't a potent offense. So as long as he gets the touches, he's still a fringe RB1 in my opinion. My issue for Marquise Brown is that as y'all comp the upside for Clayton Tune to Davis Mills, and basically everyone we saw under center for them last year without Kyler Murray, that's why everyone struggled without Kyler Murray, because those quarterbacks were practically useless. And so, like, it's an egregiously small sample. But remember, Marquise Brown is in those last 2 games without Kyler and without Hopkins did see 40% of the team's air yards, but it didn't matter. Even the target share didn't matter. He averaged 68 receiving yards per game because the quarterbacks are so inaccurate and poor. And so I do wonder if we're just going to be citing his shares as if they're like XFL target shares where it gets like 30%, but they don't matter because the quarterbacks are so bad.
John, you're on the clock in a best ball draft. It's round 5. You need a receiver. Chris Godwin or Marquise Brown?
Chris Godwin.
It probably is Chris Godwin, but man, there are just so many reasons to hate that offense. Like the short answer is Baker Mayfield and Kyle Trask. The longer answer is that, like the Rams 2 years ago, whenever Matthew Stafford had that career year and 80% of their touchdowns came through the air, the Bucs last year, 84% of their touchdowns came through the air, like the highest rate in the last decade. It's not going to happen again. Not only that, but Brady, not only captaining that offense to league highs in pass attempts per game the last 2 years, that volume falls off. Not only that, but Brady also feeding like targets within 2 seconds from snap to throw, which is top 2 the last 2 years. That's going to fall off because Brady understands offensive line play, an offensive line that no longer has Shaq Mason. So they just got worse this year. So it's just, the Bucs offense is definitely one I'm avoiding at all costs. But, I guess if Godwin in the 5th round for the targets, why the hell not?
Yeah, they often talk about the edge in Dynasty. And you know what? With the information and great analysts like you two guys giving out information, there's almost no edge in information anymore. It's how you apply it. So one of the edges that I still like in fantasy football is players that disappointed me last year but finished really strong. And one of those guys is Cam Akers. Theo, Cam Akers got some positive news again this week. He's still in the 6th round in Dynasty leagues. People are hands off. I've been aggressively. What's the realistic outcome for a 23-year-old running back who won me the league last year? He was RB1, I think, in the championship or the semifinal last year. Why are people still a little bit afraid to draft Cam Akers?
Well, I think there's always a fear among Dynasty players for anybody who's had injuries, especially when it comes to the running back position. But Cam Akers is in a fantastic spot. They certainly gave him the rock a ton to end last year. I think that 6th round ADP, as we come up to like main event season, he's going to start being a 5th round selection, just because it's very apparent that he's going to have a chance to be second fiddle in that offense to Cooper Kupp. I know John's a massive Cooper Kupp guy right now, but they need playmakers.
Wait, hold on. Massive Cooper Kupp. John has him as his WR2. Okay, that's Billy Muzio in a high stakes draft got Cooper Kupp at the 14th pick. John
I was next to Billy when we saw that. Don't worry.
Well, there you go.
I was quite shocked. Yeah.
Let's underline that because you say, "Oh, who's aggressive on Cooper Kupp?" No, John is saying that Cooper Kupp is going to be the guy here. Continue, Theo.
Yeah, so I think that there's, and I don't want to put this on Cam Akers, but there's a number of parallels between Cam Akers' situation this year and Josh Jacobs' situation last year. They're both getting selected, as back-end RB2s. They're both going in that like 6th round, 7th round, kind of that gross running back spot. And they're both entering their 4th year in the league. So for me, there's some similar parallels where people were kind of hesitant to take Jacobs last summer. It was kind of like, I guess I'll take him here guy, and he absolutely smashed. I don't see that as Akers this year. I don't think he's going to be like a top 5 running back, but I think he's the kind of guy that can give you top 15 running back production, like high-end RB2 finish. And I think right now he's a tremendous value at ADP. And Alan, you have like a point, like for dynasty managers, I think that the production might be worth more than what you'd have to give up to get Akers. I think that a lot of like maybe a couple of questionable type rookies could pull off of Akers. I saw some like 112, 111, 110 type trades for Akers by a couple of sharp managers in non-superflex. So I think that the values, the markets really hasn't adjusted to what a value he could be this year for your fantasy team.
All they did was add a day 3 running back 2 after Akers averaged 19 touches per game from week 13 on. And remember, last year's Rams offense was Sean McVay's first unit. Sean McVay, who was hired in 2019, his first one to average fewer than 62 plays per game. They averaged 58.5. I'm expecting significantly more volume for this offense as well.
John, are you on Kyren Williams, Zach Evans, and I'll throw because there's a hive, Tion Evans?
No, he's not even on the team anymore. They
got rid of Tion.
Yeah, he's now on Carolina.
Well, I stand corrected. So
yeah.
I feel like Kyren and Zach Evans is like polarizing right now, but because people want Zach Evans to be a thing, but I feel like Kyren Williams is kind of like a McVay guy. Where would you be at? Is there a handcuff that you would be considering getting on your fantasy teams for this year among those late round picks for LA?
This time of year, I'm just such a boomer that I chase guys who I know play special teams. Thus, I know they're going to be active on game days. And remember, Zach Evans, before he got seriously injured, got injured as the team's primary kick returner in week 1 last year. So he's a primarily pass-catching back who is also on special teams. Thus, I naturally go to Kyren Williams.
All of the reasons that, Theo, you just named are the reasons why I like Cam Akers. There is no clear backup. But,
yes.
Hey, John, let's continue with these with running backs that nobody wants that could have a chance this year. Podfather's not here today, so we have a chance to talk about CEH in a good way. Isaiah Pacheco, they're hoping he comes back to midway through training camp, meaning he's not going to be there when training camp opens. Is this an opportunity? CEH, I get him in the last round of best ball in a high stakes dynasty draft I just did with Theo. I got him in like the 17th round. CEH, is there still hope for this guy? Should dynasty managers target him as a throw-in?
I still have hope, but understandably, where he was getting production before he got injured last year and before Pacheco became actual factor in that offense was based solely on touchdowns, and it was all going to bust. That balloon was the most easiest one to pop. We all saw it coming from a mile away, just like Jarrett McKinnon's receptions and how he scored in 6 consecutive games a receiving touchdown. We saw that going away from a mile away. And then, of course, Pacheco out-touched McKinnon 43-23 in the postseason, including 3-2 from inside the 5-yard line. So I still believe, and I have no actual substance to give you on this, except that he's a last-round pick who was a former first-round pick. I still take CEH in the last round, especially because for best ball leagues, right? We gravitate towards week 17 stacks since that's all we know. We only know the teams. We don't know anything else about week 17. And so maybe since we're all targeting Jahmyr Chase and the Bengals, CEH will be there as a starter in week 17. I don't know. But that's why I take him in the last round. Maybe that's hope. Maybe that's not. Who knows?
Guys, there was a TLC song about this. Don't go chasing waterfalls. Leave CEH. Pivot, guys. Sure. Pivot, guys. The dream is dead.
TLC, didn't one of them burn down Andre Rison's house?
Allegedly.
Oh, allegedly, supposedly.
Yes, yeah,
Go ahead,
I think so.
As someone who was taking Wayne Gallman in the last round last year, who didn't make the 49ers final roster, trust me, I've made worse last-round picks than CEH.
I had a question for John, just a general, I like to ask people this question this time of year. I think, you guys bring up that it's difficult to find edges because there's so much information out there. Years back, you'd have to go and find a guy like John or Evan Silva or Matt Kelly, and maybe they had that inside information that could really help your fantasy league. Now with Twitter, now with all the news we get, with what RotoWire's dropping, with Player Profiler 4for4, it's constant. How do you filter out, John, what's real and what's not? Because you have so much coming out this time of year. You have so many beat reporters. Are you a drum beats guy, or are you a kind of apprehension and maybe a little bit pessimistic when you hear training camp and mini camp news?
I am quite pessimistic, honestly, but also that I'm just fortunate to where that's admittedly, I have many weaknesses in life. I can go through all of them another time. But one of my strengths is actually just filtering out the bullshit. I got very good at that over the years of taking in all the information and literally only leaving myself with 1 or 2 tidbits. That's actually how I had the, shout out to myself, the most accurate mock draft in the nation this year, because I took in all those Will Levis trade rumors and said, that's bullshit. I don't believe that at all. And thus I was the only one left with CJ Stroud and Anthony Richardson at 2 and 4. And so, yeah, I just kind of do the work beforehand. Let's say, for instance, Jalen Hyatt right now. Jalen Hyatt's ADP is around 160, 170 on FFPC. It depends where you're getting him at. But right now, I have a really hard time to find him doing any better than maybe one spike week game. Hayden Winks even pointed out in his college research that Hyatt only ran 3 routes from 1 or 2 wide receiver sets last year in Tennessee. His breakout year with 1,200 yards, 15 touchdowns, and Hyatt couldn't get on the field except in Mickey Mouse packages that don't exist in the NFL. And so we've already heard that Hyatt's working with second, third team offense. He's just struggling to get on the field already. So ADPs like that don't make sense to me. I don't want to hype up those things. And so I kind of just go through the work that happens before the draft and after the draft, and then go into OTAs and say, I don't believe that because of the work we've already done.
Right.
Shout out to John for his great mock draft. And I will say that we were all out in Kansas City in the content house, and you were the talk of it for a little bit for nailing that. I know that Cody and Billy and also Alex Dunlap also had entries in that. So big hat tip to you, John.
And I'm also drafting Jaden Reed everywhere now because of Alex Dunlap. He's the one who kind of pointed me out. And then once we got the draft capital, it's oh, this is a player I need to get on top of.
Yeah, Reed was such a great value. We talked about him a lot here on the Sonic Truth podcast, and I think it's starting to correct a little bit. You'll see it in the redraft streets, but he's good. He's
still too low.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Theo, and I think everyone has their own process. And what John's telling me is that about filtering out noise from news, and when you've been doing it as long and you're in the weeds, you kind of tend to have I hate to use the word gut feel, but just all that information that you've collected, and you read into the words, this player may be more involved. That's nothing. Maybe. Of course, everyone might be more involved. It's they hope to have this person Da 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 da. It's those non-definitive words I think are you have to really examine, and maybe also the source of where it's coming from. Is it a beat writer that's had credible hits versus just someone that throws paint splatter at the wall?
It's only a mistake if you don't learn from it. Otherwise, it's education. So it's not a big deal to get these things wrong. But again, once you've done this time and time again, you have to remember the one thing we all have different from person to person is our own intuition. And so like I can tell someone my intuition, like whether they believe that or not, I don't know, but I have it within me. Even something as simple as like going outside. Right now, my biggest problem in life is these effing birds are eating my jalapeno plants. And so I go outside even to like check the plants, and I poke the soil, and I don't water based on an app. I water based on vibes. And so like my intuition tells me like, oh, that soil needs water or not. And the plants are doing great. The organic seeds are actually all growing. And so it's just little things like that, I think, that differentiate each other from ourselves.
Can you imagine what bird poop with jalapeno bites out of it is like? I mean, come on.
Hoping that doesn't help. I'm trying to scare them off, Alan. I'm doing my best.
All right, guys, it's time. We're about 30 minutes in, so I want to do our first round of flag plants to end Dynasty Week. And what this is we're just going to go one by one really quick, and a player that we can't stop trading for, we can't stop drafting, and it's really just a jump-off point for conversation for maybe John or Theo has seen a player that you might be, you the listener, might be a little soft on or a little aggressive on, and maybe this is something confirming what you've already been doing or is totally counter. And I like to take in all that information. So we'll start with you, Theo. Who is a flag plant player? And really what we mean is a player that every time they seem to come up, whether they're at ADP or you're a little aggressive on, you can't stop drafting or trading for in some of your dynasty leagues.
I mean, it was Jahmyr Gibbs. I did everything I could to get 102s before the NFL draft happened.
In your rookie drafts. In
the rookie drafts, in non-superflex. And I did everything I could to try to trade for additional 102s after the NFL draft. And I also have taken Jahmyr Gibbs in dynasty startups. I think that he is going to be the next big thing at running back. I think that this is an offense that I am bullish on. I think he's going to be a real weapon for them. I think that if everything works out well, this could be like a Reggie Bush-like receiving year for Gibbs out the gate. And I know there's people apprehensive about the fact that David Montgomery's there. There's people apprehensive about the fact that he's a little bit smaller. But at the end of the day, I think he is an elite weapon. I think they're going to figure out how to use him. And all of the running backs with top 15 draft capital have hit. They've all given us a top 6 season. I think with a guy like Gibbs, it's going to come sooner than later. I would compare his rookie season to like what we saw from Christian McCaffrey, right around RB12. I think that that's a reasonable expectation for him. So I'm huge on Gibbs.
Well, John, before we get over to your flag plant, Theo, you're on the clock in the late second round in a dynasty startup. Are you taking Breece Hall or Jahmyr Gibbs? Let's really test out your fortitude here.
I took Jahmyr Gibbs over Breece Hall in a 750 FFPC startup. I'll take the guy. It's very simple. I love Breece Hall. I still have a ton of Breece Hall. But one guy was drafted in the top 12. One guy was a second-round pick. One guy is coming off a major injury, and one guy is healthy. If Breece Hall was never injured, it would be Breece Hall. I think Breece Hall would be right behind Bijan if he was never injured. And you could make a case that he could be, I wouldn't, but some people could make a case that Breece Hall should be ahead of Bijan because we've actually seen it in an NFL field. But right now, it's Gibbs for me.
The way I put it, Theo, is that Swift was 8th among all running backs in targets per game, and they hated him. So
there you go.
That's simple sometimes.
There you go.
John, how do you feel about ACL players, running backs, that following year and long-term for Dynasty? Given where Breece Hall goes in all these drafts, would you take someone like that before we get to your flag plant player, or just let someone else deal with it?
I'm glad you asked, because now I get to do a shameless plug for the Most Accurate Podcast, which I'm on every week, a host at 4 for 4. And I recently had those who know, not me, but I had Edwin Porras and Adam Hutchinson, what they can call fantasy doctors, fantasy analysts, on the same show to answer these same questions. And they actually got me on top of Breece Hall, calling his current mid-third round ADP something you should attack because the torn ACL is completely different than Javonte Williams, which was basically a restructuring and a massive tear across multiple ligaments. So Breece Hall is someone, according to them, the people that know, we should be on top of.
All right. So, and one more time for everyone that isn't already following your podcast, shame on you, but where can they find that again?
The Most Accurate Podcast, wherever you listen to podcast at.
All right. And I'll co-sign that. I'll sometimes DM John and I'll say, great show. That's like a weekly listen. I think it's a must listen when it's John and John behind the mic. or it's you guys with a guest, or you guys with Sam in season, it's tremendous. Highly recommend it.
Well, now I'm pissed off because now I have to add another podcast to my already absurd amount, but I'll do it. You know, I'm
every Wednesday afternoon, Alan. That's it. I'll be
in
there for you.
I'll be in. All right. You really going to bat right now, Theo, for Jahmyr Gibbs? I like it. You said you took him in a high stakes draft like that. John, same question to you, man. Flag plant, put it down. Who's the player that you just can't stop drafting?
Can't stop drafting is still DeVonta Smith. Right now, because remember, last year his yards per route run increased across from A.J. Brown, got better. He was 30th as a rookie. They add A.J. Brown. He was 18th among all wide receivers. Not only that, remember, he showed standalone value in out-targeting A.J. Brown, 105-98 across their last 12 games together, including 11 of those 12 games having 8+ targets. And so he's a player who's already shown he can explode across from A.J. Brown. And I do think this Eagles offense will somehow, you don't think so, but somehow be even more potent through the air this year. First of all, they're league high in rushing touchdowns. Those 23 touchdowns were the most in the last 5 years in the NFL. So we expect that to regress. Also, Jalen Hurts, against what was the league's easiest schedule, averaged 19.5 first half attempts compared to 11 second half attempts per game. Now that they have a median schedule, 16th overall, which induces more competition than the league's easiest, I do think we're finally going to get some teams to push back against them, which means Jalen Hurts goes through the air more often. So DeVonta Smith is the player I'm jumping on top of.
Let me ask you this guy.
Can I follow up to John on that? Mm-hmm. So just to take it over to the redraft streets, is this DeVonta Smith outscoring A.J. Brown this year, or you think they're both very, very good at ADP?
I think they are both very good. There will be weeks where DeVonta scores A.J. Brown, but A.J. Brown's still the player I also want to be high on. I want to push both up.
Yeah, I mean, you could get them both, right? If you want to, I mean, I don't know why with this other than a best ball, but you can get A.J. Brown at pick 8 and then DeVonta Smith early ahead of his ADP in round 2. But I just looked, weeks 1 through 17, full PPR rankings, DeVonta Smith was wide receiver 9 on the year.
He had the 0 at the week 1 as well. So everything DeVonta Smith should be taken with, like, let's remove that huge outlier game, and the season was even more impressive when you took that 0 from week 1.
Yeah, no, that's DeVonta Smith. I there's one other guy I know, John, that's telling me DeVonta Smith. Now hearing you say it, it's probably the reason why I don't draft A.J. Brown. Go ahead.
And right now, all you have to do, you said take him the second round ahead of ADP, but all you're doing really as a positional factor is taking him ahead of T. Higgins, Jalen Waddle, and Chris Olave most of the time. Garrett Wilson's usually gone to the back of the first round. So Chris Olave, I do like a bunch, but if you're trying to mix and match your stacks with a large portfolio, of course I don't mind DeVonta ahead of ADP.
Right, and if you're in a league where Jalen Hurts falls to the 3rd, I haven't seen that too much in the NFFC. I know in the FFPC, Jalen Hurts can make it to the 3rd. Mm-hmm. That's the stack that's available to you because the A.J. Brown stack is not going to be available unless you want to take Hurts at, in that early second round. So, that's a really good pivot off of A.J. Brown. I won't go too deep on mine. Christian Watson is certainly a flag plant guy. I just don't understand why he's not in the same tier as Olave and Garrett Wilson. I mean, I get why, but he was wide receiver 9 by the end from the time he became a full-time starter from like week 10 to week 18. And, I understand all the reason why not, but you're not paying retail. You're paying wholesale with Christian Watson. And this has been a polarizing topic over at Player Profiler. So please feel free to crap on that or push back, John and Theo. So is Christian Watson a flag plant guy, or is this a little bit, maybe I should pump the brakes here?
I only trade him, Alan. He's actually like my flag plant get off guy.
So he's the red flag plant guy.
Yes. I only trade him, though, because I'm even in industry leagues where he draws 2024 101s. And so if that's the case, I get off him every time. Remember, not only was he unable to out-target Allen Lazard last year. Everyone cites from week 10 on, that's when Christian Watson's breakout came, even though the breakout came, 7 of those touchdowns in a 4-week stretch came on only 15 catches. I don't think that's sustainable. But also from that week 10 on spot, he averaged 4.7 targets to Allen Lazard 6.7. So everyone goes, okay, Lazard's not on the team anymore. I understand that, but he still couldn't out-target him. Also, he relied solely on touchdowns, and that's great for best ball or whatever, but he averaged 22.9 fantasy points in the 4 games he scored a touchdown. when he didn't score a touchdown in those surrounding 6 games, he averaged 7.5 points, which was 57th among all wide receivers. So you're banking like a low-end tight end basically on explosion games, and that's it. And so to me, if I can get a 2024 101 for that, I'm doing that every time. That's my only pushback.
And I'll say, Alan, like the whole argument of him versus like the Wilson and Olave.
Not versus, because you don't have to pay the same price. So it's not versus.
Certainly, but why he's not in that, the sample size is smaller. A lot of it, his scoring was touchdown dependent. There is the quarterback change, and also the fact that he's a little bit older. So he's 24 years old versus 23 for Olave, and Wilson is like 22 and a half. So I think, and also the draft capital, you're talking about a second round guy versus a guy that was a, top 15 pick, even when you put like Drake London in the mix. I think I don't count him as second round draft capital as much as I count T. Higgins as second round draft capital. It was like one pick away, right? And they traded up to get him. But everything you guys are saying, the market agrees with you, not me. I mean, the market pushes him back 2.5 rounds, and I think there's a little bit more volatility. The one other thing I'll say, and then we'll move on, is that the quarterback change, which John smartly brought up, it's the game of one, sample of one. He did have 4 for 110 and a touchdown with Jordan Love, sample one, but at least it was something. It was versus Philly. It was something. There's something to hang my hand on.
Those 2 drives by Jordan Love are hot too. I during the pandemic, my worst investment was buying Jordan Love holographic rookie cards, like rare rookie cards, and like I still have hope for them because of those 2 drives.
All right, go ahead.
And I'll say this, like, John brought up Jayden Reed earlier in the show. If you're bullish as Alan is on Christian Watson, or if you're bearish on him in terms of like a truly elite status as John is, I'll call myself somewhere in the middle there. Go and get Jayden Reed, because I think that if Christian Watson does not hit this year at cost for Dynasty, it probably means that Jayden Reed had a really good rookie season. And I think there is a little bit of correlation in values with those guys and a lot of outs where a year from now, Jayden Reed could be worth a lot more. Christian Watson could be worth the same or slightly less. But I think that having exposure to both, you're betting on one of those two being a big time player, heading into next year. And I think that's the way to play it.
John, I'm about to jump out a window after that take because I'm heavily invested in Christian Watson, and now I'm feeling depressed. I actually took Christian Watson in a dynasty startup over Cooper Kupp. I think I'm going to go vomit now. But let's talk about those guys in dynasty before we get back to our flag plans, John. Let's say the older wide receivers, the 29, 30-year-olds that just are mega producers. We're talking about DeVonta Adams. We're talking about Cooper Kupp, Tyreek Hill, and Stephon Diggs. Mm-hmm. Where are those guys? Where do they belong in dynasty rankings?
So Stephon Diggs, Amari Cooper, and what was the other one you mentioned?
It was DeVonta Adams, Cooper Kupp, and Tyreek Hill. Now, so Tyreek Hill, I still think should be very high up there, probably ahead of Stephon Diggs right now. I know we got the rumors, and he told everyone, maybe for attention, that he would retire after this contract. I don't know if that's true, but at least we saw with Tua under Mike McDaniel, like Tyreek Hill is an absolute like world beater, a 31.5% target share to Waddle's 22% in games from Tua. So it's like not even 1A, 1B as some call them. It's literally just Tyreek Hill and an island alone. And then Waddle relying on efficiency, which he's the kind of player like Deebo Samuel who can get by because he's a one-of-one talent when it comes to speed. But also remember Tyreek Hill already led the league in yards per route run, but that increased to massive 3.4 yards per route run in those games from Tua as well. So certainly someone I want to keep betting on. Diggs is an interesting one given the latest OTA news, but we talk about sifting through news and just like spitting out what matters. I don't think Diggs, like trade rumors or grievances on June 18th, matter so much when it comes to the regular season. So he's still someone I'm still fine with buying on around the first, second round turn. Correct me if I'm wrong, Theo. But that's kind of where I have value him right now. DeVonta Adams is the clear one to sell just because we don't know if we have Garoppolo. We don't know if Garoppolo matters whatsoever as well, since Adams led the league in yards and touchdowns from 20 yards deep. Like Garoppolo's both attempts and completion rate 20 yards deep the last 2 years pales in comparison to Derek Carr's, who himself wasn't even a good thrower when it came to downfield shots. So like I do wonder about Adams' ceiling for the rest of his career, honestly, for as long as he stays in Las Vegas. So I would put Adams behind those two.
Yeah, it's interesting because Tyreek Hill, like John brought up a lot of factors with Tyreek Hill, but the guy had 170 targets and only 7 touchdown catches. We've seen this guy put up a 15 touchdown season recently, 12 touchdowns. I mean, the guy's a touchdown machine. So it's scary how high Tyreek Hill's upside is. And I think that the whole dynasty manager is kind of hating the fact that he might retire early is about the dumbest thing I've ever seen, because we don't play this game in 6-year windows. You're playing this game in like 2-year windows or 3-year windows. That's how you should approach your dynasty team. You want to win money in dynasty. That's how you pay for future seasons.
Not according to all the polls that I see.
Yeah.
All the polls you say, what's the number one thing you like about dynasty? People say trading.
This is like a Jordan McNamara.
Yeah,
poll right
winning
now.
is not the most important thing. But go ahead. I digress.
Yeah, so it's like I would say that in terms of cost in dynasty leagues, in terms of drafting them and also in terms of trading for them, Tyreek Hill and Stephon Diggs cost more than Cooper Kupp right now, despite the fact that Cooper Kupp is right there neck and neck with Hill and ahead of Diggs right now in ADP for redraft. I have made offers for Cooper Kupp. John, you'll like this one. In a single quarterback FFPC 250, I traded Terry McLaurin and Chig Okonkwo to get Cooper Kupp. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, and my team was a contender, and now I think it's really, really a contender. And I think that there's kind of a disconnect in terms of what these guys are worth in the redraft market versus what they're worth, to our dynasty team. So I agree with John. It's Tyreek Hill, it's Diggs, it's Kupp, and then it's like a tier break to Adams, because I have the same reservations you do. Las Vegas could be an absolute mess this year.
And I like Terry McLaurin for that trade in particular, as much as anyone else. But the issue, remember, is that Terry McLaurin last year, we had Curtis Samuel lead him in targets for more than a month of games worth. Then we had Jahan Dotson over the last month lead McLaurin in targets as well. And so, there's just this abundance of targets to go around, and it's not necessarily going back to McLaurin, who has yet to finish as a top 20 receiver in points per game for his entire career. And so, yeah, of course, I'd get off that for a 2-year window for Kupp even.
Yeah, and just in terms of points per game, McLaurin's a guy that we always love the talent, but at the end of the day, he's never cracked 15 points per game.
Right.
You've seen Cooper Kupp put up just astronomical numbers. You've seen him put up 25 points per game. So now we're just measuring these things. So it is possible for you to go get elite assets right now without paying up all of your future draft picks. You can go get these guys with a younger wide receiver 2 that might never crack wide receiver 1 status with a couple pieces on top.
Yeah,
You say McLaurin never averaged 15, but then remember, as we always talk about Kupp in 8 full games with Stafford last year led Justin Jefferson, averaged over 20 per game.
Yes,
that's how good Kupp was.
Yeah. This is you're making me rethink Kupp in a good way for this year as well. John, on the clock in a single, just redraft, just you take him at pick 2 after Jefferson. Is that what we're gathering here?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And Theo,
and also because for that reason, Alan, I agree with McCaffrey as the RB1 overall, but remember the way the second and third round works at this time, anyways. As we talk, you can get RB1s in the second and third round, like Nick Chubb, Derrick Henry, Tony Pollard, Breece Hall, Josh Jacobs, even. They're all there. So I don't need to draft McCaffrey at 102 or 103 when I'm still going to get an RB1, in my opinion.
Right. So you like the 2-3 turn running backs better than the receivers, given what you can get. Yeah. So that's a roster construction thing. That's always interesting to think about that way. I just want to ask you both one more thing about the 30-year-old wide receivers, because what really is dynasty fantasy football? It's the value of players, right? We see if we take the same player, we value them very differently in redraft than we do in dynasty. And all of those guys that we talked about, the Cooper Kupps, Tyreek Hills, even Devonta Adams, Stephon Diggs, they go in the first round of our redraft leagues, but there's players that go after them that we value more in dynasty. So really, when you juxtapose them with like T. Higgins, Chris Olave, John, for example, what are you going to value more here? The 30-year-old produce now guys, or someone that's flashed in the NFL like T. Higgins, like Chris Olave? Where should that group be in the young versus the old in dynasty when you do rankings?
I'm valuing for startups the younger individual. I think it's genuinely, I know it's a cop-out, but it's a case-by-case basis, honestly. There are teams where I've gone out and traded for Keenan Allen this offseason. Best ball right now, he's still one of the best values on the board because he's being undervalued for what he did last year, and I'm not sure why. I think just because, as you mentioned, like the 30, 31-year-old age right now. Keenan Allen, like last year, he finished 6 games with Mike Williams, and in those 6 games, he averaged a team-high 28% target share. Like, all he does is lead that team in targets, and we have at least one more year from Justin Herbert. And Justin Herbert in this Chargers offense, by the way, I know Theo was in my DMs. I forgot to write you back, Theo. I'm sorry. Was asking me this stat that I got from Sports Info Solutions that I keep citing on every podcast. Justin Herbert, only 23% of his dropbacks came with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams on the field last year. And in those 23% of dropbacks, he led the league in completion rate. So I think as long as they're healthy, the sky's the limit for this offense. And so I want that 1-year window in this case for Keenan Allen with Justin Herbert.
Yeah, Keenan Allen, though, you don't have to pay the freight for it. He goes like 9th and
that's
10th
why you
round.
should trade for him if you're like competing for right now.
Yeah.
Super cheap.
Yeah, I actually was able to trade Tyler Algier pre-NFL draft for Keenan Allen. Somebody was happy to do that. That's like the dynasty trade of,
I keep jumping in. I'm sorry. I just also wanted to say Quentin Johnson, who we're all high on. Remember, only 10% of his routes came from the slot in college. Thus, he's not a threat to Keenan Allen. He's more of a threat for boundary play and Mike Williams targets like underneath. That's it.
You never have to apologize for jumping in. We work with Podfather every week.
True.
He doesn't apologize and jumps in. So, but it's okay. We love the Podfather. It's what makes him great. Theo, we're back to flag plants. Who's going to be your second flag plant player for the end dynasty week here?
Gosh, this is a great question. I want the second-year wide receivers. In a dynasty startup recently, I took Chris Olave very, very high. Alan, I know that's kind of like a flag planting. Chris Olave is kind of low-hanging fruit right now for fantasy because everyone loves him.
Very bold
so
take.
I'll go a little bit lower. I believe that the Treylon Burks and Jahan Dotson tier right now is a little bit beat up, and I think that those kind of guys you're able to acquire them. I think that there's a chance for Jahan Dotson to lead Washington wide receivers in PPR points this year. I think that this is a guy that played in 12 games, and he had tied your guy Christian Watson for most touchdown catches for rookie last year. And I think it's funny because we love to poke holes at stats, but you're talking about a guy who had elite touchdown production with elite draft capital in a situation where he's at least the clear number 2 target on his team. So for me, Jahan Dotson is kind of like the fact that he's being drafted in like wide receiver 40-ish land for redraft is a little odd to me. I think he should easily be closer to like wide receiver 30, and I think he has a chance to finish as a wide receiver 2 this season. And then Treylon Burks is a guy that I have a lot of, but until somebody else lands there, this is a guy that's going to push for a 28% target share. So the offense can be poor, but at the end of the day, like John talks about like the pessimism with news reports and just kind of thinking, kind of brushing it aside. But I always remember the Michael Thomas rookie year where the drum beats were there from the beat reporters, the coaches, and then finally Sean Payton just comes out and is like, just draft him for your fantasy teams. It's kind of like that with Burks. Like Vrabel last year was kind of pushing him aside. You saw Robert Woods and all these guys, Burks struggled with like the asthma. I think there was some conditioning issues. Now, pretty much every report out of Tennessee is how good Burks is doing, whether it's from the beat reporters, whether it's from Vrabel himself. So I think that like Burks, it's been kind of too beat up in terms of where he's at, in terms of his ADP right now for redraft. And I think that there's a correlation with that in Dynasty. I think Burks is a breakout this year, and I think that he costs a lot less than he did last year as a rookie. And Dotson, everything about Dotson, it doesn't connect versus what his trade value actually is.
You're not connecting the dots on that one?
There you go, Alan.
That's
incredible.
John, what do you think the chances are? Give me a handicap percentage that Dotson outproduces Terry McLaurin for the season.
I would still say, I still give McLaurin the lead. Gosh, I'd say 40-60.
Okay, that's close.
In favor of McLaurin?
I
think it's close.
That's close.
Not close enough, in my opinion, to be like 55-45, but I'm giving Dotson still a little bit of a lean here. He already did the last month, so.
Right, I did not think you were going to say that. I thought you were going to say 25% chance. I'm with you there. I think that there's a chance, so why not take Dotson? That's a good call, Theo. All right, John Daigle, give us another flag plant. A player can't stop drafting, can't stop trading for every time he's there.
I will go with, although we're probably late in his window, I'll still go Tony Pollard. It's someone I still draft. I I think there is a long-term window here, but more importantly, the short-term window is massive. I don't think Ezekiel Elliott comes back to this team. I don't know how many more bullets he has to survive this offseason to where people finally start respecting his ADP. Like, his touches per game alongside Ezekiel Elliott have increased in every year. But then remember, he has 3 starts without Elliott. He finishes the RB1, RB3, and RB7 on the week in those games, averaging 19.5 fantasy points. And now all this team has behind him is Malik Davis, Deuce Vaughn, and Ronald Jones. That's it. Maybe they add another veteran, but they're already out on Dalvin Cook. They haven't brought in Leonard Fournette or Kareem Hunt and taking them seriously. So honestly, all roads lead back to Pollard, who was even available for OTAs following last year's fibula surgery. So I think everything is just fine for him to be an every touch back and get the entire workload as long as he's healthy.
John, I'm with you. I love Pollard right now, but there's some very sharp people that are kind of pushing back just
Fair.
in terms of, can he take that volume leap?
Mm-hmm.
Is there a specific projection you have for him? Because I think for him, when I look at him, if RB1 is in the range of outcomes, I really think it could happen. If it really happens with Pollard, I think, he could hit top 5, running back status. Do you think he can get an 85 target season? Or do you think he's the kind of guy that could is he going to be able to handle 240 carries? Because one of the two, I think, has to happen. I don't think it can be the passing volume has to increase for him. His targets need to go way up, or he needs to be able to at least produce close to Zeke in terms of touches. And I think that, for me, it's more like a 215 carries, and then he gets an exceptional amount of targets that the market's really, really not accounting for. How do you see it?
I honestly think we get bailed out in drafting him at the end of the second round because, in my opinion, his floor is still low-end RB1. I mean, already last year, he only averaged 13.5 touches per game because Zeke was healthy in every game, and he finishes the RB9 in points per game. And so, now, even if they were to sign someone, you then have to put Zeke's 16.5 touches per game to that dusty veteran that got signed in July. It just doesn't make sense logically. So if we get Pollard now getting even, let's say 15 touches per game, and I think the ceiling is higher than that, then of course you would want a piece of that because that brings him, as you said, in Bijan, Austin Eckler territory as a top 3 or top 4 guy. And so, yeah, I'm drafting for his ceiling admittedly, but only because I do not worry about his floor. I still think it's higher than RB9, honestly.
Yeah, no, Pollard's an interesting one because I could so see it, and then there's people that push back, so it's probably what's keeping his ADP down. John, you mentioned Malik Davis was his backup. Yeah. Dynasty players, he might still be on the waiver wire, and if you have a 25 deep team, maybe not so much in 30. Is Malik Davis built to be the backup here, or is he actually going to be one of those guys that you could stash in your lineup because he gets 8 touches a week?
No standalone value in my opinion, but he's my pick. Right now, it's between him and I already mentioned Ronald Jones, who we know about. And then as much as I want Deuce Vaughn to be good, it's just a 5-5 running back. We can't really bank on that in the NFL. So I have been taking Malik Davis as the bailout option, yes.
Theo, do you think they're going to add just a quick prediction? Do you think Dallas adds anybody or they're happy with Davis?
No, I agree with John. I think it's going to be Malik Davis. I had a tweet out about the handcuff running backs that I think are going to be more valuable August 1 than July 1, and a lot of people hated my Malik Davis call. But again, the market is so oversaturated with all these available veterans, and Dallas is just sitting there. So I think at the very least they want to see Malik Davis in camp, and maybe just maybe they have a little more confidence in Ronald Jones than we do. But the thing about Davis is Davis can catch the ball. He was in the same backfield as Damian Pierce at Florida, and he out-targeted him. So I think that Davis has a little bit of juice, and I think it's a guy that the Cowboys are familiar with. I'm Davis all the way.
It's also, remember, historically a roster under the same owner for the last 30-plus years that has not cared about backups whatsoever. They worry about being top-heavy for the sexiness and selling jerseys, and they genuinely do not care about the last 20 guys on that roster, which is why they always end up with poor backup quarterback play, and Jalen Tolbert potentially getting healthy scratch or trying to start games, thus leading to Dennis Houston being like your starter the first month of the season, and no backup running back help. So I just genuinely don't think they care about adding other people.
Which Cowboys jersey is going to sell the most not after Dak Prescott this year?
It's still CD. They gave CD, Michael Irvin, Dez's number just to sell jerseys.
Yeah.
CD all day.
Yeah, I have a flag plant that nobody really likes, but I'm curious. That edge in fantasy football, players that disappointed, that finished strong. Jerry Judy helped win you a fantasy championship if you made it through. I mean, it was like wide receiver 6 during the fantasy playoffs. I know it was a lot of touchdowns, but it actually happened. We can't say regression, this, that. He came alive. So I'll let you guys break down the analysis here. I'll start over with John. Is Jerry Judy? I mean, again, this is a player that you're going to have people that just want to trade away for first. So are you in on Jerry Judy? He doesn't cost you much. Could we see a big breakout? I do like that they have Sean Payton there. That is a good thing.
He is my pick since we're now through 2 seasons of his career, and he's played both the outside and the slot. Also, him and Cortland Sutton have overlapped for 23 games together, finished 23 games together the last 2 years. And Judy has had 7 top 24 finishes to Sutton's 4 in that time. So either way you slice it, Judy's been the more reliable option. So he's the person I bet on.
All right, Theo, is Jerry Judy a worthy flag plant player, or are you not drafting him in your high stakes?
No, I actually took him this week in a players championship on FFPC, and I got him in the 5th round. I know we're not supposed to talk about redraft, Alan, but I still have my Jerry Judy shares in Dynasty, and I agree with John. I think this is the year. We believe in Sean Payton bringing normalcy to that offense. I think it's easily. I mean, it's incredibly low hanging fruit to say Denver is going to be much better offensively because they were last in points per game, but I think they could make a significant leap. And Jerry Judy, I think, is the focal point. We have, John alluded to Javonte Williams' injury concerns. Samaje Perine in the backfield. You have question marks of how much Marvin Mims, a guy we really like, but how they will use him. I think he's going to have a role. Sutton, you have Greg Dulcich in like a joker role. But at the end of the day, Jerry Judy is the one you want to bet on in that offense. And if Russell Wilson bounces back, I think Jerry Judy is a guy that could flirt with low-end wide receiver 1 numbers. I think he's fine for your Dynasty team. I do believe that he could be in Dynasty. He's not a long-term wide receiver 1 in Dynasty. I think you have to kind of measure that out. I think he's more of a guy that you're happy to have on your roster that could have a wide receiver 1 season this year. But I do believe Marvin Mims makes a big step forward in year 2, and maybe that they kind of merge in terms of Dynasty value a little bit.
I just cannot shake the fact that when Nathaniel Hackett was fired, Russell Wilson then was the QB2, QB3 on the week.
Albert O came alive.
Like, that's literally all it took was Hackett to be fired. So I keep coming back to that. Remember, they gave Mike McGlinchey and Ben Powers and Chris Menhertz big money to block and help keep Russell Wilson upright this year. So I just love everything about the Sean Payton era so far.
Yeah, it's the Hackett thing is like low-key Urban Meyer, right? It's addition by subtraction, everything. All right, guys, before we do our last group of flag plants, I just want to ask you something about, because a lot of people are jumping into Superflex Dynasty Leagues, and a viable strategy, if you can't get 2 elite quarterbacks, is to get that. It's similar to how you treat running backs. You get that one hero quarterback, and then you accumulate all these skill players, and then you kind of backfill with a few let's call them risky quarterbacks. So of the risky quarterbacks that have a little bit of upside, of course, I'm talking about Desmond Ridder on the Atlanta Falcons and Sam Howell on the Washington Commanders. John Daigle, which one of these guys is going to outlast the other? And what's I'd say the bull case for both?
I think the riskiest one, are we talking the top 3 or just the top 5 or 6?
We're talking just Sam Howell and Desmond Ridder. Those are the guys that if you want to completely punt quarterback 2 and just backfill it at the end and just grab a couple of those guys. So of those 2, because they seem to have the shortest leash going into the season, which one do you think has the longer term viability, if any of them?
Sam Howell, I think, has the much longer term. Remember, we are just 3 years removed from Sam Howell being the number 1 overall pick in the draft. And then everyone from Dami Brown, Javonte Williams, Michael Carter, Desmond Patton, I believe it was, all of them left North Carolina and left Sam Howell by himself without any NFL help. And that's how he became either a deep shot or rushing specialist, because he had no one else to go to. And then last year, we only saw 1 game. He was just fine. He at least provided fantasy points, since we do know he had a rushing floor with those 5 carries, 35 yards, and a touchdown in the final game. Now under Eric Bieniemy, a bolstered up offense as well, and whole offseason to get united with Bieniemy as well in this new offense. So yeah, I think Sam Howell has a much longer leash, honestly. It is interesting, Alan, because you mentioned the two quarterbacks also who have big money veterans behind them as players who are clearly there to push them. My only issue, though, unlike Howell, Desmond Ridder wasn't even a good prospect. He's there basically just to engineer an offense and not screw it up. And when push comes to shove, because we will get more passing volume for the Falcons this year. Like last year, their 48% pass play rate in neutral game script, it was the lowest in the last 10 years. They literally just can't pass less than they did last year. So I'm expecting more volume naturally. And if that's the case, like it's on Ridder to keep it together. And I just don't know if he's the type of player who is, or at least Heineke was okay. He was fine last year. So
Theo,
I'm taking Howell every time.
Yes, Theo, that sounds like my role on the Desmond Ridder role. Just host and don't screw
Keep it
up.
together.
Just don't screw it up, right? Yeah.
So I will agree with John that the higher fantasy ceiling is definitely Howell, and Howell is a guy that I have a Howell Brissett combo. It's very easy to do that in Dynasty because I think Brissett is by all means a very capable backup, and I think that if you have both those guys, you're feeling good. But I will say this, John. I think in terms of holding on to his starting role, I think there's a chance that Desmond Ridder does enough this year and the Falcons win too many games and they kind of box themselves out from like the elite players and he could hold his job. So yes, he absolutely is a game manager, whereas Howell is a guy that can, maybe produce some fantasy points. But at the end of the day, with Drake London and Bijan Robinson and Kyle Pitts, he's got some pretty talented guys to manage, and the defense I think is going to be improved in Atlanta and a winnable division. So if Desmond Ridder takes them to the playoffs and they win, 9 or so games, I think there's a chance that he's back behind center next year with maybe a little more competition behind him than Heineke, but there's a chance that Ridder could do it.
All right. Yeah. All right. We're going to get to our last flag plant player right now. But before that, I just want to remind everybody what's going on in the world of Player Profiler, in the world of 4for4. So, John, for anyone that just came onto the live stream, tell them what they need to check out that you're working on right now during the offseason.
4for4.com. I am currently behind the scenes building my team preview shells that will begin launching next month. But as for right now, tons of best ball content, tons of player profile. Even my best ball tiers are live on the site for everyone to read through. If you're in FFPC streets as well, we have like CSVs to download where I manually cater them. For instance, like we were talking about, Alan, I have Joe Mixon as my RB12, but my rankings don't matter if we can still get Joe Mixon 2 or 3 rounds later. So you have to actually cater those things to what drafts are happening. And since I'm constantly in the streets, I like to manually do that myself. So they're all downloadable for everyone there. And as we mentioned earlier, the most accurate podcast.
Yeah, I can't wait to check that out, the latest episode as well. Theo, you're adding the Dynasty Roundtable to the already thousands of podcasts in the Player Profiler stream. Why don't you tell everybody about that quickly?
Yeah, so you can check it out on Wednesday evenings on YouTube, on Player Profiler YouTube. The Dynasty Roundtable is going to be some of our writers discussing Dynasty. I want to give those guys a shout out. They do a really good job writing for us. Seth Dywald, Matt Babich, and then they'll be rotating writers with also some guests. I'm sure I'll pop in there one night this summer. And I also want to give a shout out to myself. My solo pod starts tomorrow. We called Press Coverage. So that's going to be my first show is going to be with Sigmund Bloom. I'm really excited about that. You can still find me here on Sonic Truth, find me on First Class Fantasy, but I'm adding one more weekly pod with press coverage. That's what it's called. It's called Press Coverage. Got it. Okay, very clever name. And just quickly, anyone that wants to check out any of my content over at RotoWire, you could do so on my Twitter at Alan Zaslowski. And we're back on SiriusXM every Sunday now from 1 to 3. I'll be with Jim Coventry every Sunday on Channel 87. You can check us out for the rest of the off season. All right, guys. Check out Alan tomorrow evening. Oh, the GOAT on the GOAT District. On the GOAT District. Alan's on the GOAT District.
And one more plug. I am live streaming by myself tonight, the 9:30 p.m. Eastern. If you're listening to this on Tuesday, best ball tournament on FFPC, the 125 entry. I got an entry in the drafts. Like those drafts don't always fill. This one's going to fill. And so I'm just going to go live for everyone tonight. I definitely want to watch that. Shoot that over. I'm going to retweet that for you because that'll be a fun one to watch when I'll shoot it out tonight.
Are any freakouts, or you have the whole draft mapped out, or are you going to start, tilting a little bit in what round can we I'm not really a tilter, but those streams are always up in the air because we have snipers on there. So we'll see if someone wants to waste a few bullets just trying to piss me off. 100%.
I don't know what it is, but I love watching live drafts. My wife watches like when she's like getting dinner ready, and I'm sitting there with like a cocktail. She's like, "What the hell are you watching?" I go, "I don't know why I like this. I just do. I just do."
Favorite cocktail, Alan?
Oh, I'm a dirty martini guy the whole way.
I was about to say I actually might make a dirty martini. Ooh. I like hot and spicy, so I like to make it with spicy pickle juice as well. But yeah, I'm a martini guy.
Yep, with a couple nice juicy olives in there. That's my thing, and sometimes too many. How about you, Theo? I'm not a Jameson guy, or
no? I'm not a huge drinker, but if I am gonna have a drink, I'll get a black label with a little bit of rocks. That's kind of my go-to. Water.
I was gonna call you like a whiskey guy. You seem like a whiskey guy.
Yeah, Theo's not a big drinker. He just blows massive rails of lines before drafts.
That's it. That's it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Alan.
Big cocaine guy. Huge cocaine guy. Huge.
Can't get enough.
All right, guys. Our last flag plant of the day for the Dynasty season. We're going to round out Dynasty Week. Let's let the guest of honor, John Daigle, who is the last flag plant guy that you need to, that everyone that follows you and trusts you needs to get blindly. I don't care if you like them or not.
Let me start with Theo. I know you had a good setup, but I closed everything out thinking the podcast was done. Now I have to open back up my notes.
Okay, so we'll start.
I also had the end screen ready to run.
Sorry about that.
I'll give John a second.
All right, so let's kill it there. Then let's go. No more flag plants. Go.
I'm sorry. My fault.
I'll say Ramondre.
By the way, one second. This is guys. This is lightning round flag plant. You get one maximum 2 lines to describe why they should get him. Theo, you're up first.
Ramondre Stevenson, he's 25 years old. He's getting older. Last year, we saw him have his absolute breakout season. I think the offense is going to take a step forward. Bill O'Brien. I'm still big on Ramondre Stevenson. He is not going away this year.
All right, I'll go second while John finishes getting, and we'll have him round it out. All the good news on Paris Campbell. I've been waiting. He's literally occupying the last spot on my roster on all my dynasty teams. I was getting ready to cut him, then he gets signed by the Giants. I expect nothing, but if I get something, hopefully I can get him into the top 36 wide receivers this year. Who the hell knows which Giants receiver it's going to be outside of Darren Waller? You're up, John.
Rashee Rice in every league. 97% route rate from the boundary in 2021, 83% route rate from the slot in 2022. So unlike these other players like Kadarius Toney and Sky Moore, who can only play one position, Rashee Rice is available in 3 wide sets no matter where you want to put him on the field, 1,000 yards in both positions.
What do you think it is? Do you think there's a little Sky Moore bias that's holding Rashee Rice down? Is that what it is? Because it burnt us last year?
Well, that and I mean, Kadarius Toney 70 ADP is wild. For as much as I like Kadarius Toney, it's so ambiguous to have that much confidence in a player. To me, is crazy.
Okay. ADP is almost the same as last year after he burned everybody. No memory.
Kadarius Toney is Sky Moore ADP this year. It's wild.
All right, everybody, that's it. That's another Sonic Truth Dynasty Fantasy Football Podcast. Matt Kelly will be back next week. I believe it's like July. Is it? Oh, no, it's not July 4th yet, right? We have another one before the July 4th holiday, or?
We'll be back normal time next week.
Be back at the normal
show.
time, everybody. If you have any questions about any of the players that John or Theo talked about, you can send them a DM, send them a note on Twitter. They'll get back to you. Till then, let us know how you do in your Dynasty Startup Leagues.
Hey, I want to take a moment to thank you for tuning in. It's important to me that all of our media be free. This is only possible because of you allowing a true independent sports media enterprise to thrive unlike any other in the business. So please subscribe to the All In Package to continue to make all of this possible, to ensure that all of our stats, information, data, content is available to you, especially you, the people that get the site and get the show.